I want to start by telling you what I found in the closet, not the whole story, just the beginning, because once you hear it, you'll understand why everything that came after had to happen the way it did. It was a Tuesday morning in April. My daughter-in-law had already moved my things into the smaller bedroom at the end of the hall, a room that used to be a storage closet before my son had it converted. She'd done it while I was visiting my sister in Houston for 4 days. 4 days, I came home and my bedroom was gone. My life packed in boxes, stacked in a room with a window that looks out at the side of the garage. But when I opened the closet in what used to be my room, when I reached up to that high shelf where I'd left some things I hadn't moved yet, I found a folder, her folder, and what was inside it changed everything I thought I understood about my life in that house. Let me back up, let me tell you who I am and how I got here so that when I tell you what happened next you understand the weight of it. My name is Carol. I'm 67 years old. I was born in Lubbock, Texas, and I have lived in this state my entire life. I raised 2 boys, my son Marcus and his younger brother Dale, in a small yellow house in Fort Worth. Their father, my husband Raymond, passed away 11 years ago from a heart attack at 61. He was a good man. Quiet, steady, not much for words, but always present. He showed up for everything. That's what I remember most about him. He showed up. After Raymond died, I managed on my own for several years. I had a part-time job at the county clerk's office, a garden that kept me busy in the spring, and church on Sunday mornings. I was not rich and I was not struggling. I was getting by with a kind of grace that I worked hard to maintain. Then Marcus, my older son, the one who had always called me every Sunday without fail, started talking about what it might look like if I moved closer to him and his wife, Renata. They had a house in Plano, a large one, 4 bedrooms. Plenty of room, Mom, Marcus said. You shouldn't be all the way out there by yourself. I hesitated. I want to be honest about that. Something in me knew that moving into your grown son's house is a delicate thing, a thing that can go wrong in ways that are hard to name. But I was 65 by then, my knees were giving me trouble, and I missed being near family. My younger son Dale was in Denver with his own life. So when Marcus and Renata offered me the large bedroom, the master guest suite, they called it, with its own bathroom and a walk-in closet, I said yes. I said yes with gratitude. I sold most of my furniture, gave away my garden tools to a neighbor, and I moved in. That was 2 years ago. The first year was good, or it was mostly good. There were small adjustments, moments where I felt I was eating at someone else's table, which I suppose I was. Renata had her way of doing things and I had mine. She liked the kitchen a certain way. She didn't like the television on in the afternoon. She ate dinner at 7, which was later than I was used to. But these were manageable things. I adjusted. I told myself that adjustment was just the shape of living with other people. I cooked on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I kept my room tidy. I did not complain about small things. I babysat their daughter Lily on weekends without being asked, because I wanted to, because Lily is 4 years old and she laughs with her whole body, and being near her was the best part of my days in that house. Marcus was working long hours. He was always working long hours, a project manager for a construction company, often out of town, often on calls in the evenings. Renata worked from home. She had a desk set up in the second bedroom, which they used as an office. I noticed as the months passed that she began to find the office cramped. She mentioned it once at dinner that she needed more space, that her work had expanded, that she was thinking about how to rearrange things. I didn't attach meaning to it then. It was a passing comment. I was thinking about Lily's laugh and whether the green beans needed salt. I should have paid more attention to that dinner conversation. The second year was different. I can't point to one moment when things shifted. It was more like a slow cooling, the way a season changes not in a single day but in the gradual shortening of the light. 1 week everything is green, and the next you notice the leaves have started to turn without your seeing them do it. Renata became more distant, not rude. She was never outright rude, but the small warmths disappeared. She stopped asking me to join her for morning coffee. She started eating lunch alone in the office with the door closed. She began responding to my comments at dinner with brief answers and sometimes just a small sound of acknowledgement, her eyes on her phone. Marcus noticed none of this, or if he did, he said nothing. He was not a confrontational man. He had a deep discomfort with household tension, which was something I recognized in him from boyhood. He had always gone quiet when things between his father and me grew strained. He retreated. He found tasks to do elsewhere. It was not cowardice exactly. It was more like a deeply trained avoidance. I began to feel like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I began to feel like furniture, something that had been chosen and placed but was no longer quite right for the room. I kept this feeling to myself. I smiled at breakfast. I watched Lily in the afternoons. I tended my small container garden on the back porch. I called my sister Patricia every few evenings and I told her I was fine. I was not entirely fine. There is a particular kind of loneliness that happens inside a full house. It is different from the loneliness of living alone. It has a face. It sits across from you at the table. About 8 months into the second year, Renata began making comments. They were always framed as questions or as concerned observations. "Have you thought about what your longer-term plans might look like, Carol?" She said this one evening while I was washing my coffee cup at the sink. I turned and looked at her. She was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, and her expression was careful, not hostile, carefully neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, because I wanted to hear her say it. "I just mean you're so capable and independent, and I wonder sometimes if this situation is really giving you the full life you deserve." She smiled at the end of that sentence, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I said I was quite happy with my life. I thanked her for her concern. I went back to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked at my hands for a long time. That was the first conversation. There were others. They grew more pointed over the following months, though they never lost their pleasant outer coating. Renata was skilled at the kind of communication that says one thing plainly and another thing entirely in the space beneath the words. Senior living communities have come so far. There's one in Allen that my colleague's mother loves. This said over a Sunday lunch, casually, the way you might mention a good restaurant. "You know, Lily's getting to the age where she really needs consistency in her routine." This said when I had rearranged the kitchen slightly to make room for a slow cooker. "Marcus and I have been talking about how to use the space in this house more intentionally." This said with her eyes on her salad, her fork moving slowly. Each sentence was a stone, laid one at a time, building something. I could see the structure being built, but I could not yet name what it was. My sister Patricia had been asking me to visit for months. She's 71 and lives alone in Houston, and she'd had a minor health scare, nothing serious, a blood pressure issue, but it made us both aware that we were not getting any younger and that we should not keep putting off the time we had together. I arranged to go for 4 days in April. I packed my bag on a Thursday morning, kissed Lily on the top of her head, told Marcus to call if he needed anything, said goodbye to Renata, who was on a work call at her desk, and raised one hand in acknowledgement without turning around. I did not know when I drove away that I was driving away from my bedroom for the last time. Patricia and I had 4 good days. We cooked together, went to the botanical garden, watched old movies, and talked the way sisters talk when they finally have the time, slowly, going back over old things, remembering people and places, filling in the spaces that telephone calls can never quite reach. I felt like myself in a way I hadn't in months. I slept deeply. I woke up rested. On Sunday afternoon, I drove back to Plano. I pulled into the driveway and noticed that the door to the master guest suite, my bedroom, was closed. This was not unusual. I opened the front door and called out that I was home. Marcus came into the entry hall. His face was doing something I had seen it do once before when he was 11 years old and had broken a lamp and was waiting for me to discover it. A held look, careful. "Mom," he said, "so we've made some changes while you were gone. I need to show you something." He walked me down the hall. He opened the door at the end, the narrow room with the garage-facing window, and I saw my things. My blue quilt folded at the foot of a single bed, my bottles on the small dresser, the photograph of Raymond and me on our 25th anniversary propped on the windowsill. Everything had been moved, neatly, carefully, with what I imagined was deliberate attention to appearances, but moved, while I was gone, without a conversation, without a question. Without even a text message. "Renata really needs the larger space for her work," Marcus said. "It's been affecting her productivity. We thought, while you were already away, it might be easier to handle the transition." I heard him talking. I did not respond for a long time. I stood in the doorway of that small room and I looked at my blue quilt and the photograph of my husband, and I breathed slowly and carefully, and I did not say the things that rose up in me. "All right," I said, "I see." I did not say anything more that evening. I closed the door. I sat in the chair beside the narrow window and I watched the light fade on the side of the garage, and I thought. 2 days passed. I kept to myself. I was polite at meals. I played with Lily. I watched and I waited and I turned things over in my mind the way you turn soil before planting, slowly, methodically, breaking up what has hardened. On the 3rd morning, I went to what was now Renata's office to retrieve a book I'd left on the shelf in the closet. I knocked. She was downstairs. The room smelled different already, her perfume, a particular hand lotion she used, the smell of her laptop and her papers. She had moved her desk in and arranged her things, and the room was already thoroughly hers in the way that rooms become a person's when they fill them with their daily habits. I went to the closet. My book was there on the lower shelf, but when I reached up to the high shelf where I had kept a few items I hadn't gotten around to moving, I found a manila folder. It was not mine. It had been placed there, tucked back, perhaps forgotten, perhaps left deliberately. I cannot say for certain. I took it down. I stood in the closet for a moment, holding it, then I opened it. Inside was a printed document, several pages stapled. The heading on the first page read, Comparative Cost Analysis, Independent Senior Living Options, Plano, Dallas Metro Area. Below that heading, in Renata's handwriting, I knew her handwriting from grocery lists and notes on the refrigerator, she had written, Show Marcus April Review. I turned the pages slowly. There were printed summaries of 4 senior living facilities, monthly costs, amenity comparisons. One had been circled in blue ink, Meadowbrook Gardens, Allen, TX, starting at $2,450 a month for a studio. On the last page, there was a printout of a financial calculator. Numbers entered, projections made, my Social Security income listed. A calculation showing how long my modest savings would last at that monthly rate. Someone had done the math on my life. Someone had researched facilities, compared prices, calculated my financial runway, and planned to present this to my son at an April review, a term that suggested a scheduled conversation, an agenda, a decision already shaped and waiting only for my son's agreement. I closed the folder. I stood in that closet for a long time. I was not crying. I want to be clear about that. I was not in tears, though the tears were there, present beneath everything, waiting for a later time in a private place. What I felt in that moment was something else, something that had no name except perhaps clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when a thing you half knew is suddenly confirmed in a form you can hold in your hands. I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I took my book. I closed the closet door. I walked down the hall and I went to my small room and I sat down and I began to think with a precision I had not felt in years. She had researched facilities, compared prices, calculated my financial runway, and planned to present this to my son at an April review. Someone had done the math on my life. I spent 3 weeks gathering myself before I said a single word to anyone in that house about what I knew. 3 weeks of morning coffee made quietly in the kitchen while Renata was still upstairs. 3 weeks of dinners where I passed the salad and asked about Lily's preschool and said nothing about folders or facilities or the math someone had done on my life. 3 weeks of watching carefully, watching how Marcus looked at me, watching how Renata positioned herself at the table, watching the small mechanics of a plan I had accidentally been let into. During those 3 weeks, I did several things. I called Patricia, not with all of it, not at first, just enough. I need some advice, I told her. She has always been the sharper of the two of us in practical matters. She asked me 3 questions and then she said, Carol, the first thing you do is understand your rights. She recommended a woman she knew, a family law attorney in Dallas named Sandra Wu. I called Sandra's office the next morning from my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, engine running. Sandra explained things to me that I had not considered, about financial contribution, about what it means to be a resident of a home versus a guest, about what leases and written agreements do and do not establish. She asked me questions, I answered them honestly. She told me what my position was and what options I had. I will not detail all of it here, some of it is still in motion, but I left that first phone call with a clearer picture of my own landscape than I'd had in 2 years. I also called Dale, my younger son. I had been reluctant to involve him. He had his own life, his own worries, and I had never wanted to become a weight between my 2 boys. But Patricia said, Carol, the people who love you need to know what's happening. You don't get to protect everyone from the truth forever. So I called Dale on a Thursday evening and I told him what I'd found and what had been happening over the preceding months. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then he said, Mom, I want you to come here. And I said, I'm not ready for that yet, but I want you to know. He understood. I organized my financial documents. I knew where everything was. I have always been careful with paper, with records, with the kinds of things that prove you exist in an official way. I gathered copies of what I needed and gave them to Sandra. I did not mention any of this to Marcus. I looked at my son across the dinner table every evening and I thought about who he was and who I had made him and what I wanted from this situation, which was not revenge, not cruelty, not the satisfaction of watching someone caught. What I wanted was simple and old and heavy as stone. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to choose his mother with his eyes open, not by accident, not because a plan had failed, but because he had looked clearly and made a real choice. I also, and this took the most out of me, made my own plan. A quiet, patient, practical plan about where I would go and how I would live, not because I had given up on this family, but because a woman who has no options is not in a position to ask for anything. She can only wait and accept. I did not want to wait and accept. I wanted to speak from a place of having already prepared for every answer. I chose a Friday evening because Marcus was home and Lily was already in bed and the house was quiet. I had made dinner roast chicken with vegetables, the kind of meal that takes time and effort and says something about normalcy and care even as everything beneath it is something else entirely. After the plates were cleared and Renata had gone to pour herself a glass of wine, I said to Marcus, "I want to talk with you both for a few minutes." I sat across from them. I had my hands flat on the table. I was wearing the blue cardigan that Raymond gave me for my 50th birthday. I don't know why I mentioned that except that it mattered to me that I was wearing something that came from love going into something hard. "I've been doing some thinking," I said, "and I've made a decision. I'm going to find my own place." Marcus's face changed immediately. Whatever he had been expecting from the tone of my voice, this was not it. "Mom," he started. "Let me finish," I said, gently, not sharply. "I've found a very nice apartment in a building about 4 miles from here. I've already put down a deposit. It's a 2-bedroom. I'll have room for a proper office, which I've been wanting, and a porch garden. I'll be able to have Lily over on weekends if you'd like that, and I'll be close enough to be useful if either of you need anything." Renata was very still across the table. Her wine glass was in her hand and she had not taken a sip. Her expression was careful, and in that careful expression I could see the adjustment happening, the rapid, silent recalculation of someone whose plan has been taken from them by the very person it was built around. "This is sudden," she said. "Is it?" I said it quietly. I looked at her for a moment, just a moment, and in that moment I let her see that I knew, not an accusation, I was past accusation by then, but as a simple statement of fact between 2 women in a kitchen. I know, and I have done something about it myself, and this is who I am. She looked down at her wine glass. Marcus said, "Mom, I don't want you to feel pushed out. I hope you know." "Marcus," I said, and I reached across and put my hand over his. "He is my son. Whatever had happened in that house, he is my son and I love him, and that does not change. I know you love me, and I know this arrangement has been complicated, and I am choosing to make it simple. That's all this is." I did not mention the folder. I chose not to. I have thought about that choice many times since then, and I believe it was the right one, because what I wanted was not a confession or an apology or a scene. What I wanted was to leave that house having handled my own life. That is what I wanted, and that is what I did. The next morning, Renata came to the door of my small room. She knocked. I said, "Come in." She stood in the doorway with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, and she looked at me for a moment without saying anything. Then she said, "I want to apologize for the room." "I appreciate that," I said. "I pushed for that," she said. "Marcus was uncomfortable about it. I convinced him it would be fine because she started again, "because I thought you'd be flexible about it." "I was flexible," I said. "I am flexible. Being flexible doesn't mean I don't notice things." She nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You found something in the closet." It was not quite a question. "I found my book," I said. "That's what I went in there for." She looked at me for another long moment, and then she nodded again slowly, and I could see something in her ease, not relief exactly, but a relinquishing of a particular tension. The tension of waiting to be exposed in the worst possible way. I had chosen not to expose her in that way. She knew it, and knowing it cost her something, because now she owed me something that could not be named or calculated or put in a folder. "Your son talks about you all the time, you know," she said. "How capable you are, how strong you are." Her voice was careful, almost soft. "I know," I said. "He is my son. He knows who I am." She left. I sat with my coffee and I listened to the house settling around me in the morning light. I moved 3 weeks later. I did not take the quilt from the small room. I had bought a new one, a deep green one from a shop I'd found online, the color of the garden I was already imagining on my new porch. I left the single bed made neatly with the original bedding as I had found it. Dale drove down from Denver for the weekend to help me move. He is built like his father and works with the same quiet efficiency, carrying boxes without being asked, figuring out where things go. Watching him move through the small rooms of my new apartment, I felt a tenderness that I had to breathe through. He is 39 years old and he still has Raymond's hands. Marcus came to help too. He was there on Saturday morning, carrying boxes, putting together my bookshelf in the living room, struggling with the instruction sheet the way his father always struggled with instruction sheets, quietly cursing under his breath while I pretended not to hear. At one point he sat back on his heels and looked at me and said, "Mom, I'm sorry for the room, for not talking to you first." "I know you are," I said, and I meant it. He is a good man with a complicated marriage and a natural inclination to avoid conflict, and he had allowed himself to be moved by the current of someone else's plan without fully reckoning with what it meant. I had been moved by currents before. I understood it. You should have told me if you wanted your own space, he said. I would have helped you find something. I know, I said, next time I'll tell you. There was not going to be a next time of that particular kind, but the offer was real and I received it as real and we moved on. Renata did not come that day. She sent a text. It said, I hope the new place is everything you want it to be. It was a simple sentence and I could not hear in it whether she was relieved or guilty or somewhere in between. I thanked her for the text. I put my phone in my pocket and I arranged my books on my new shelf. By Sunday evening, the apartment was mine. I could feel it being mine in the specific way that a space becomes yours, when it holds your silence instead of someone else's, when the morning light comes in at the angle that is yours to receive, when you can stand in the kitchen at midnight if you want to and be disturbed by nothing. I stood at the kitchen window that Sunday evening and watched the last of the April light, and I felt something I had been missing for a long time. Not happiness exactly, though that came too in time. What I felt was ground beneath my feet. My own ground, the very specific feeling of standing in your own life. It has been 7 months since I moved into this apartment. I want to tell you what those months have looked like because I think people imagine that stories like this end with drama, with confrontation, with some reversal of fortune loud enough to satisfy an audience. But real life, my life, does not work that way. Real life is quieter, real healing is slower, and real peace when it comes does not announce itself. Lily comes to my apartment on Saturday mornings. I pick her up at 9 and we make pancakes and she helps me water the porch garden and we read stories on the couch with her feet in my lap, and she falls asleep sometimes before noon with her mouth slightly open and her small fists curled against her chest, and I sit very still so as not to wake her, and I think about how extraordinary it is to love a child. Marcus calls on Sundays as he always has. We do not discuss what happened at length. We do not need to. The relationship is what it is, a mother and a son who love each other and will continue to love each other through all the complications that love accumulates over a lifetime. I have no interest in making him choose. I have no interest in nursing grievance. Grievance is heavy and I have been carrying things my whole life, and I am 67 years old and I am learning, finally, to set things down. Renata and I are civil, more than civil some days. There is an understanding between us that is not warmth but is something, a mutual recognition perhaps. She knows what I know. She knows what I could have done and chose not to do. I know who she is and what she is capable of and what she was afraid of. We exist in that knowledge without naming it, and I think that is, in its own strange way, a form of respect. I joined a watercolor class at the community center. This surprises me as much as anyone. I have never thought of myself as artistic, but I wanted to do something with my hands that was entirely mine, that served no one, that had no practical purpose. The teacher is a woman named Ruth who is 74 and paints with extraordinary confidence and says things like, paint what you feel, not what you see. I am not sure I understand that yet, but I keep trying. I have dinner with Patricia twice a month on video call, and once a month we drive to meet halfway at a diner in Waco, and we sit across from each other in a booth and eat pie and talk for 3 hours, and it is better than almost anything. I think about the folder sometimes. I think about the person who made it, who sat at a desk and looked up facilities and ran the numbers and wrote Show Marcus April Review. I do not think about her with anger. I think about her with a kind of sad understanding. She was afraid. Afraid of what exactly I'm not sure, of her own future perhaps, of a household that was not entirely hers, of a woman who had outlasted her welcome in a role that had not been properly defined from the beginning. Fear makes people do the math on other people's lives. Fear makes people plan. Fear does not make people evil, it just makes them smaller than they could be. I could have been smaller too. I could have confronted her loudly, involved Marcus in a scene, turned the folder into a weapon. I could have collapsed entirely, packed a bag and driven to Dale's in the middle of the night and called it a crisis. I did neither. I waited, I prepared, I left on my own terms, I arrived in my own life. That is what I want to say about how to carry a difficult thing. You carry it until you understand it well enough to put it down properly, not thrown, put down. Fear makes people do the math on other people's lives, but grace is choosing not to use the numbers against them. I have been thinking about what this story is really about, not the practical parts, the folder, the bedroom, the facility brochures, but underneath all of that, what it was really about. I think it was about visibility, about whether I was seen as a person or as a problem to be managed, about whether my presence in a household was understood as a contribution or as a complication, about whether being old and a woman and someone else's mother qualifies you as a full human being in your own story, or whether you are gradually reduced by inches, by polite comments over salads, by bedrooms taken while you're away, to a supporting role in someone else's narrative. I am not a supporting role. I did not become one when Raymond died. I did not become one when my sons grew up and left. I did not become one when my knees started aching and I needed help with things I used to do alone. I am the main character of my own life, and I am 67 years old, and I have raised children and buried a husband and managed a house and kept a garden and made hard choices with limited information, and I am still here, still standing. Still showing up, which was, in the end, the thing I valued most in Raymond, and the thing I have tried to be for myself. To any woman reading this who feels herself being slowly made smaller by a household, by a family arrangement, by polite sentences that mean something else, I want to say this. The ground is still beneath your feet. It has not been taken from you. You may have to find it again, may have to move toward it deliberately, but it is there. You have more options than you are being made to feel you have. You have more time than the calendar they are building for you suggests. Do the quiet work. Gather yourself. Know your rights, your resources, your people, and then act not in anger but in the full, calm authority of a woman who knows exactly who she is. That is what I did, that is what I would do again. Last Saturday morning, Lily was helping me water the porch garden. She was carrying her small purple watering can, the one I bought specifically for her, and she was very serious about the task, leaning over each pot with great concentration, the tip of her tongue visible between her teeth. She watered the rosemary and the basil and the small pot of marigolds near the railing. Then she stood up and looked out at the parking lot below. Not very scenic, I admit, and she said with great satisfaction, "Your garden is good, Grandma Carol." My garden is good. It is small and it is mine, and the morning light falls on it from the east, and I water it every other day and it grows. And on Saturday mornings, a 4-year-old girl with her father's cheekbones and her mother's focus stands beside me in it and helps me tend it and calls it good. I want nothing more than this. I wanted nothing more than this all along, to have my own small ground and the people I love nearby and the dignity of a life I chose and tended myself. We are not diminished by age, we are not diminished by widowhood, by dependence, by the accumulated losses of a long life. We are deepened by them. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Raymond would have understood everything I have told you tonight. He would not have said much about it. He would have handed me a cup of coffee and sat down and looked at me, and I would have known, in the way that you know the people you have loved longest, that he saw me clearly and was proud. That is enough. That has always been enough. I am Carol. I am 67 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Plano, Texas, where the morning light comes in from the east and the porch garden is growing. I showed up for my own life. I am still here. If this story found something in you, if some part of it felt familiar or gave you a word for something you had not yet named, I hope you'll sit with that for a while. You don't have to share it. You don't have to act on it immediately, but notice it. Notice what rang true, because the things that ring true in other people's stories are usually showing us something about our own. Take care of yourself, know your rights, know your people, water your garden. And if you have someone in your life who is carrying something like this, quietly with dignity at dinner tables and in small bedrooms, see them. That is the most important thing, just see them.